At 3:47 in the afternoon, with 156 guests seated on the rooftop terrace of the Millward Hotel, the first boutique property Waverly Knox had ever designed from a single rented drafting table, her phone lit up with a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. Her veil was pinned wrong on the left side. Her mother, Odette, was dabbing at mascara in the corner, and in approximately 4 minutes, the string quartet would shift into the processional. She had planned this wedding the way she planned every project, with attention to load-bearing details and zero tolerance for last-minute surprises. She answered anyway. Something in her, the same instinct that had once made her reopen a hotel floor plan at 2 a.m., because a measurement felt wrong, told her to pick up. The screen showed a conference room. Not any conference room. The Thornfield Grand's private negotiation suite. The one she'd booked for next Thursday's meeting with a Singapore-based hospitality group that could double Knox Studios' client base. She recognized the paneled wall, the long table, the particular angle of afternoon light through the east-facing windows. Sawyer Blaine sat at the head of that table. Pippa Aldridge sat to his right, wearing the silk blouse she'd texted Waverly about just last night. Just got it. Perfect for your rehearsal dinner, right? And signing something with the easy confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment far longer than any ceremony. Waverly did not know who had placed the call. She never found out. But she understood, within 10 seconds, exactly what she was looking at. She pressed record. Then she watched for another 40 seconds. Long enough to see Sawyer push a second folder across the table. Long enough to see the Thornfield's legal representative accept it without reading it carefully. Long enough to hear Sawyer say the words as Waverly's authorized representative going forward. Before she set the phone face down on the side table, took 3 slow breaths, and made a decision. She did not scream. She did not send the video to anyone yet. She forwarded it to a private cloud folder, texted her attorney Yara Kim 4 words, "Call me in 5," and walked to the window overlooking the rooftop terrace, where 156 people sat waiting for a wedding that had just become something else entirely. Waverly picked up the bouquet her florist had left on the credenza. White ranunculus and sprigs of eucalyptus. She had chosen the flowers herself. She carried them to the door. Odette Knox looked up from the corner chair, her mascara finally under control. "It's time," she said softly. "You look perfect." "I need the microphone," Waverly said. "From the officiant now." Her mother's face moved through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. "Waverly. The caterers are paid. The bar is open. I need the microphone." The terrace at the Millward had always been Waverly's favorite thing she had ever made. Low limestone walls with climbing jasmine. Tables set at angles, so no guest's back faced the skyline. She had spent 11 days arguing with the original contractor about the placement of the lighting rigs, because she understood, even then, that the difference between a beautiful event and a transcendent one was often 4 inches in either direction. 156 guests turned when she stepped out. Some smiled. Some checked their programs. A few looked past her toward the entrance, expecting Sawyer to appear behind her. He did not appear. The officiant, a calm woman named Dr. Patricia Mers, who had performed 200 weddings, and once told Waverly she'd seen everything, read Waverly's expression and handed over the microphone without being asked twice. "Thank you for being here," Waverly said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Sawyer won't be joining us today. That is not an emergency, it is a decision. The ceremony won't proceed, but this terrace is paid for through midnight and so is everything on it. Stay, eat, listen to the music. The staff will be taken care of. Please don't contact him on my behalf." She handed the microphone back before the silence had time to turn into noise. At the far edge of the terrace, standing near the jasmine wall with his jacket still on and no champagne in his hand, was a man she recognized and had not expected to see. Forrest Carver ran Carver Capital Group, a real estate and hospitality investment firm, with properties in 9 cities. He was known in her industry as the person who asked the right questions before signing anything, which in Waverly's experience was rarer than it should have been. He had been considering Knox Studio for a major development called the Harborside District, a mixed-use hospitality project that would be the largest commission in the firm's history. Sawyer had told her last month that Forrest had pushed the decision to Q1. Sawyer had handled that particular conversation. He had handled a great many of her conversations. In the past year, she was now understanding. Forrest waited until the guests had begun to shift and cluster, before walking across the terrace to where she stood. "I'm sorry to be here under these circumstances," he said. "Why are you here?" "Because you asked me to give you my decision in person." He held a slim gray folder at his side. "I came to say yes to Knox Studios' Harborside proposal. My office received a message last week from Sawyer's number saying you were stepping back from active projects after the wedding and that he would be your operational point of contact for all major contracts going forward." A pause. I didn't believe it. The architecture of the last 12 months rearranged itself in Waverly's mind. Every meeting she'd thought Sawyer was attending as her support. Every negotiation he'd handled because she was busy with a deadline. Every introduction he'd made on her behalf at industry events. "He is not my operational point of contact," she said. "He has no authority over any Knox Studio contract." "I know that now." Forrest glanced toward the terrace, where the string quartet had started playing again. Something Waverly had specifically chosen for cocktail hour. Something she now heard as if from a very long distance. "There's more. He filed a revised partnership document with my legal team 3 days ago. It listed a company called Blaine Advisory Group as Knox Studios' primary contract holder for all new Carver Capital projects. The filing claims the arrangement takes effect upon your marriage." There was no marriage, which meant the arrangement could not take effect, which meant Sawyer had counted on a wedding that was, as of approximately 6 minutes ago, canceled. "Send everything to Yara Kim," Waverly said. "She's my attorney. Copy nothing to Sawyer." She watched Forrest nod, not quickly, not eagerly, just once, like a man who understood instructions. "I'll be in touch tomorrow." She walked back inside and called Yara. The next 2 hours had a particular quality Waverly would later describe as productive grief. She was not numb. She was also not willing to let the sensation of betrayal run the afternoon. Yara answered on the first ring. By the time Waverly had changed out of her wedding dress and into the slate blue blazer and trousers she'd packed for her departure outfit, a detail that now seemed almost darkly convenient, the instructions were already moving. Sawyer's access to Knox Studios' project server was suspended. His credentials for the firm's vendor portal, client communication system, and shared drive were revoked. The bank received a call. A transfer of $470,000 to an account registered to Aldridge Creative LLC. Pippa's lifestyle brand, which primarily existed as an Instagram grid and a very expensive mailing address in Soho, had been submitted that morning for processing on Monday. It was flagged, frozen, and queued for review. Waverly also discovered that Aldridge Creative had already received $230,000 in payments over the previous 8 months, approved from Knox Studios accounts by Sawyer, under a consultant agreement Waverly had never seen. The agreement described Aldridge Creative Services as strategic brand integration and lifestyle positioning. When Waverly asked Felix Torres, her operations director, to produce a single deliverable from those 8 months, Felix came back 17 minutes later, looking like a man who had found something unexpected inside a wall. "There's a folder," he said. 14 invoices. The services listed are things like concept development, creative direction, audience alignment. No client names, no project numbers, no outputs. How did the payments clear? Sawyer had approval authority for vendor payments under $50,000. He split most of them. Felix set the printed list on the desk. One was for $49,800. Waverly looked at that number for a moment. Then she said, "Protect payroll first. Everything else goes to Yara. Don't tell anyone outside this office what we're reviewing." Felix nodded. He had worked with Waverly for 4 years. He did not ask her how she was feeling. She appreciated that more than almost anything that had happened today. Back at the hotel, Waverly found her father Gerald in the terrace garden, speaking in low tones with 2 of his college friends. He came to her when he saw her face. "Sawyer called me," Gerald said. "He says you had a panic attack during the preparations. He says he's giving you space. He's giving himself a head start." Waverly showed her father the video. Not the financial documents yet. She needed to understand what story Sawyer intended to tell before she revealed what she knew. "Look at the folder he's signing. Look at the date." Gerald's jaw tightened. "That's this week. 3 days ago." Her mother Odette arrived at the edge of the garden, still holding a champagne flute she hadn't drunk from. "Pippa keeps calling me. She says there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and that Sawyer was only trying to protect you from stress with a business transfer filed before our wedding." Odette went quiet. I'm not asking you to take sides, Waverly said. I'm asking you not to carry messages. Anything Sawyer or Pippa sends to me, please forward it directly to Yara. Gerald put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. That was sufficient. Pippa Aldridge had been Waverly's closest friend for 14 years. They had met in an architectural theory seminar, where Pippa had asked a question so confidently wrong that Waverly had laughed, and Pippa had laughed too, and they had been largely inseparable until approximately 3 days ago, when Pippa had apparently signed her name on a document in a hotel conference room and decided that 14 years was worth less than whatever Sawyer Blaine had promised her. Pippa sent 11 messages that evening. The first, said Waverly, didn't understand the full picture. The fourth explained that the Aldridge creative arrangement had been Sawyer's idea, and Pippa had only agreed because she thought Waverly was in the loop. The seventh said Waverly was being cruel to someone who had always been in her corner. The 10th asked whether the company credit card attached to Aldridge Creative would still work. Waverly saved the 10th one. She did not respond to any of them. Instead, she drove to Knox Studio at 9 that evening and sat with Felix and their lead project manager, a methodical woman named Bia Chung, who had joined the firm 2 years ago and quietly become the person Waverly trusted most with load-bearing details. And they went through every contract, every communication, every external meeting Sawyer had attended in the past 18 months. The picture that emerged was thorough and ugly. Sawyer had attended 11 client meetings where Waverly had not been present, describing himself in follow-up emails as managing partner, Knox Studio. He had submitted a revised scope document to a Dallas hotel group, one of Knox Studio's best long-term clients, suggesting that the firm's design philosophy would evolve toward a more commercial approach. Under new leadership after Q1, he had recommended Aldridge Creative to 3 prospective clients as Knox Studio's preferred PR partner, with a referral fee arrangement that appeared nowhere in any official agreement. He had been redecorating her company around her, one quiet email at a time, for over a year. What do you need from me? Felix asked. A complete access audit. Every external communication sent from a Knox Studio address that I didn't write. Flag anything with Sawyer's name, Blaine Advisory, or Aldridge Creative. Send it to Yara tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I talk to our clients before he does. The calls Waverly made over the following 3 days were not defensive. She did not explain or apologize. She called each client directly, confirmed her role as founder and creative director, noted that any communications they had received from other parties did not reflect authorized firm positions, and asked for 30 minutes to walk them through the current project status. Every client stayed. 2 of them mentioned, unprompted, that something had felt off about the communications they'd received from Waverly's office in recent months. The Dallas Hotel Group's contact said, honestly, the tone was different. You always ask about the housekeeping team's feedback. Whoever wrote those last emails didn't mention staff once. That detail stayed with Waverly. Sawyer had been careful. He had copied her style closely enough to pass a quick reading. But he had never understood what she actually cared about. The people who made buildings function every day. And so his version of her had always been missing that mattered most. Forrest Carver's team sent the Harborside Agreement to Yara on Wednesday. It was clean. No language that allowed a third party to represent Knox Studio. No provisions that activated upon a marriage. No mention of Blaine Advisory Group anywhere in the document. Forrest had pulled Sawyer's previous filing, apparently within an hour of his conversation with Waverly on the terrace. He called Thursday morning. I have a question that isn't about anything personal, he said. Do you still want to present Harborside to the committee yourself? I'll present it myself. Friday at 10? Friday at 10. She arrived with Felix and Bia, and 3 years of work compressed into 60 minutes of precise, unhurried presentation. She did not mention Sawyer's name once. She addressed every question directly. When one committee member asked whether Knox Studio could handle Harborside's scale alongside existing commitments, she put a staffing plan and a project timeline on the table and let the numbers do the talking. The committee approved the project before noon. Forrest walked her to the elevator afterward. You're going to have a scheduling problem next spring, he said. Harborside's Phase 2 timeline overlaps with the Meridian renovation. I know. I'm hiring 2 senior designers next month. Good. He pressed the elevator button. The answer is yes, by the way. To the question, you were thinking about whether I came to the terrace because of Sawyer's story. I didn't ask you a question. You were thinking one. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. He did not follow. She was still smiling when the doors closed. Sawyer's first move, when he realized the accounts were frozen and the filing had been pulled, was to text Waverly 22 times in 90 minutes. The messages cycled from injury to accusation to something that wanted to be tenderness. He said she was making a mistake. He said he didn't understand the pressure he'd been under. He said the Aldridge creative arrangement had been her idea once, at a dinner she'd clearly forgotten. He said he still loved her. She forwarded everything to Yara without reading past the third message. His second move was a podcast, a design industry show with a modest but loyal following, hosted by someone who had once given Knox Studio a favorable write-up. Sawyer appeared as a guest and described a firm in creative turmoil, a founder who had become difficult to work with as her profile grew, and a leadership structure that had depended heavily on his behind-the-scenes guidance. He did not name names, but he didn't need to. Bea brought the episode to Waverly the morning it dropped. "Play it," Waverly said. She listened once, all the way through, with Felix and Bea in the room. "He wants us to react," she said when it finished. "He wants Knox Studio explaining itself in public, which shifts the conversation from what he did to what we say about what he did." "So we don't respond at all?" Yara sends the host a factual correction. One paragraph. "Sawyer Blaine holds no position at Knox Studio and has no ownership stake. That is everything." She paused. "And update the company's team page today. Every project credit, every patent reference, every current bio, accurate and complete." The host published the correction that evening. Several industry contacts reached out to Waverly directly, having heard the episode. She replied to each with 2 sentences. "Thank you for reaching out. Knox Studio is focused on Harborside and our current client work." Pippa, meanwhile, had begun positioning herself as a wronged party in the unfolding story. She gave an interview to a lifestyle newsletter in which she described herself as collateral damage in a difficult relationship, and mentioned vaguely that she had tried to protect people she loved from information that was too much to carry alone. The newsletter asked no follow-up questions. Pippa also filed an insurance claim on a piece of Waverly's equipment she had borrowed 18 months ago and never returned. She listed herself as the owner. Waverly did not engage. She reported the equipment as company property to her own insurer, provided the original purchase records, and let the 2 claims sit in front of each other like an obvious answer to a question Pippa had hoped no one would ask. The National Hospitality Design Forum was held at the Clifton Convention Center in early autumn, 8 weeks after the wedding that hadn't been one. It was the industry event Waverly had first attended 7 years ago, as a junior designer with a folding table and a poster board. She now had a main stage slot and the completed Harborside concept to present. Sawyer had registered a company for the occasion. He called it Blaine Aldridge Studio, and he had secured a presentation slot in the afternoon program, scheduled immediately before Waverly's. Pippa was listed as creative director. Waverly learned this 3 days before the forum. She spent those 3 days not preparing a counterattack. She spent them finishing her presentation, briefing the Knox Studio team on what they'd be demonstrating, and reviewing a piece of information that Bea had located 2 weeks earlier, a university design archive that held Waverly's original concept sketches for the breathing room methodology. The adaptive hospitality design framework Knox Studio had built its entire reputation on. The archive had accepted the donation 4 years ago. The catalog was public record. The sketches predated by 3 years any design Sawyer Blaine had ever put his name near. She gave the archive record to the forum's ethics committee chair the morning before the event, alongside a copy of Blaine Aldridge's promotional materials, which featured those same design principles, rendered in slightly different colors. She asked the chair to review them before any presentations began, and to handle the matter as the committee saw fit. Then she went to set up her demonstration space. Blaine Aldridge Studio's presentation lasted 40 minutes. Sawyer spoke without notes, which had always been something he was good at. He described the breathing room concept as the result of years of collaborative development, and thanked Pippa for bringing the human story to the work. He showed slides of Knox Studio projects without Knox Studio's name attached to them. He named Harborside as an example of work originating from their shared methodology. Waverly sat in the audience with Felix beside her and watched without moving. When the ethics chair asked Sawyer to identify the original creator of the breathing room framework, Sawyer said, "Blaine Eldridge Studio holds that intellectual property." When the chair asked the same question of Pippa, Pippa said, "We developed it together from the beginning. I was there before anyone believed in the work." The chair thanked them both and called for a 15-minute transition. Waverly's demonstration was not a rebuttal. It was a room. Knox Studio had built a full-scale mock-up of a harborside adaptive suite in the convention center's exhibit hall. A retired engineer who used a power wheelchair moved through it without asking anyone for assistance. A woman caring for her elderly mother tested the bathroom door clearance with a walker. A hotel housekeeper showed the committee how the removable wall panels worked and how quickly she could complete a full room turnover without lifting anything over 30 pounds. Then Waverly addressed the ownership question. She put two images side by side on the screen. The first was a page from the University Archives public catalog. Her original breathing room sketch, donated 4 years ago, bearing the archive's institutional stamp, her donor name, and a date photograph taken at the time of submission. The second was a slide from Blaine Eldridge Studio's presentation from 40 minutes earlier. "This is a public institutional record," she said. "The forum received it before today's sessions began. I'm not presenting it as accusation. I'm presenting it as fact, because the work and the people who built it deserve a factual record." The archives director, seated in the third row, stood without being invited. "I accepted that donation personally. The sketches in our archive are in Miss Knox's hand. They identify her as sole designer and have remained in our custody since the date shown. No co-creator is listed anywhere in that file." Sawyer approached the stage from the side without a microphone. "Those were informal sketches," he said loudly. "The commercial application was developed through our partnership." "Please wait for a microphone," the chair said. He kept talking. "This is a coordinated attack. Forrest Carver is funding this because Knox Studio is tied to Carver Capital, and he wants Blaine Eldridge removed from the market." Forrest, seated near the back, did not respond. Waverly had asked him in advance not to. The chair gestured for a microphone to be brought to Sawyer. Before it arrived, Pippa stepped out from behind the curtain at stage right. Her face was white. "Tell them who actually registered the breathing room trademark," she said. Her voice shook, but the words were entirely clear. Sawyer turned. "Pippa, you put it in Blaine Advisory Group's name 2 months ago. You told me it was a protective filing. You told me Waverly had agreed to the arrangement." Her breath was audible in the hall. "You told me we were going to build something real. You signed the Aldridge Creative Agreement voluntarily, because you said it was going to be legitimate work." Her voice steadied, taking on the flat, cold quality of someone who has finally stopped, hoping the other person will tell the truth on their own. "Because you said Waverly was stepping back and wanted me handling the brand side. You said she had agreed." She looked at the audience, and then at Waverly, and something moved across her face. Not remorse exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has just understood that the story they've been living in was not the one they thought. "I didn't forge anything. I didn't alter any documents. Tell them that part." "Pippa." Sawyer's voice dropped into the calm, reasonable register Waverly recognized, the tone that meant, "Stop, you're making this worse." "We agreed. You promised me Harborside." The shake was gone now from Pippa's voice. "You said once the wedding happened and the contracts transferred, I'd have creative director credit on every Carver property going forward. You said Waverly would be too occupied being grateful to look closely at anything." She lifted her chin. "Those were your words. I have them in writing." Every recording device in the room was pointed at the stage. Waverly did not move. She had said what needed saying. The forum had the archive record, the patent timeline, and now a witness who had just testified against her own interests in front of an industry audience. There was nothing left for Waverly to perform. She asked the host for the microphone one final time. "Knox Studios' work speaks for itself," she said. "The forum has the documentation it needs. We'll address remaining matters through the appropriate channels. I want to thank the full Knox Studio team, especially Felix Torres and B. Chung, whose names belong on every version of this work." She left the stage. Forrest found her in the corridor. One of those gray service hallways that ran behind every convention center she had ever worked in. The kind nobody ever bothered to design carefully enough. "Do you want company?" he asked. "Stay," she said. He did. The legal process moved over months, not days. The breathing room trademark was invalidated and returned to Waverly's name. Blaine Advisory Group was found liable for the unauthorized Aldridge creative payments, the attempted contract transfers, and the false filing with Carver Capital's legal team. Sawyer entered a civil settlement that required full repayment and barred him from representing any Knox studio interest for 10 years. Pippa's cooperation was documented. Her liability was real but narrower. Aldridge Creative was dissolved. She found work eventually at a small events firm in Philadelphia. Far from the hospitality design world, she'd tried to enter through a door that hadn't been hers to open. Knox Studio completed Harborside Phase 1 the following spring. The breathing room suites were covered in 4 major trade publications. 3 of the reviews mentioned a housekeeper, who had demonstrated the wall panels at the forum. Waverly had asked the publications to include her. She and Forrest ate dinner at Harborside, the night before the official opening, in the restaurant kitchen, because the dining room was still being finished, and the kitchen smelled like fresh paint and something close to possibility. Forrest was sitting on a prep counter, which was not how Waverly had imagined the CEO of a 9-city investment group spent his downtime. And she found she liked it about him. "My brother is going to ask you for a design consultation within 6 months," he said. "I wanted to warn you so you have an answer prepared." "What's his budget?" "Whatever he claims, cut it in half and be skeptical of that." "Then my answer is no." "Good. He needs to hear it from someone he can't charm." He looked at her sideways. "I can't charm you either, for what it's worth." "You can," Waverly said. "You just try honestly. That's different." They sat quietly for a while, the way people sit quietly when silence doesn't cost anything. "There's something I've been waiting to ask," Forrest said. "Until this building was finished, until the work was done and there was no contract between us." He looked at her, straight, the same way he had looked at her during the first presentation, like a man who was genuinely interested in the answer, and not already deciding what it should be. "Do you want to keep building things with me? Beyond the project, beyond any business arrangement, knowing it will require the real kind of negotiation." "I want a prenuptial agreement," Waverly said. "Separate business interests, a real attorney on each side. No surprises." "Obviously. And I want us to argue about things that matter and stop when we've actually resolved them. That's a higher standard than most people set." "You're asking me to build something," Waverly said. "I always specify the materials first." Forrest smiled. Not the polished version she'd seen in magazine photographs, but something smaller and more genuine. "Then let's start with the foundation." They married 8 months later, in the finished Harborside lobby, before the hotel opened for the day. The guest list held 39 people, the Knox Studio employee trustees. Yara Kim, Felix and Bea, Gerald and Odette, who had both asked independently whether they were welcome, and had both been told yes. Several members of Forrest's operations team. The housekeeper who had stood up at the forum. There was no vendor binder. There was no document waiting in anyone's folder. The marriage license had been reviewed by Yara and filed with the county 3 days prior, both signatures given in the clerk's presence, in a room with no decorations and very good lighting. Waverly wore a clean ivory dress and carried eucalyptus, the same variety as the terrace at the Millward, which seemed right. Not because it erased anything, but because it was hers. Gerald walked beside her to the entrance and stopped when she did. "You're not giving me away," he said. "No," she said, "but I'm glad you're here." She walked the rest of the way alone. Forrest was waiting at the original concierge desk, which Waverly had preserved and lowered 6 inches to serve guests of every height, a change his committee had almost rejected on cost grounds, before Waverly pointed out that the alternative was designing half their guests into invisibility. He looked exactly like a man who had shown up, knowing her answer wasn't guaranteed, and had decided the uncertainty was worth it. The officiant asked whether both parties entered willingly. They did. When it was Waverly's turn, she held Forrest's hands and said, "I will tell you the truth before I make it comfortable. I will ask what you mean before I assume the worst. I will keep choosing you on ordinary days, and not only the ones that make a good story." Forrest said. I will not mistake watching over you for owning you. I will let you be wrong sometimes and right often, and I won't pretend I can't tell the difference. I will stay when you ask me to and go when you need me to, and I will tell you which one I think it is, so you can decide. They signed the certificate at the concierge desk. Yara and Felix witnessed. The document went into a plain blue folder. Breakfast was at one long table. No seating hierarchy. The housekeeper sat next to Forrest's CFO and spent 45 minutes explaining what the new removable wall panels had changed about her mornings. The CFO took notes on his phone. Waverly overheard it and said nothing. It was exactly what she had designed the room to make possible. Odette gave Waverly a small envelope at the end of the meal. Inside was a photograph. Waverly at 9 years old, sitting on the floor of her parents' study, surrounded by hand-drawn floor plans of imaginary buildings, every single door drawn wide enough to walk through without turning sideways. Odette had found it while securing the family archive. She had written Waverly's name on the back in permanent marker, as though establishing ownership of something she should have claimed much sooner. Keep it, Waverly said. I know what I was building. She did. 6 months after the opening, a reviewer called Harborside, a hotel that did not ask its guests to justify their presence. Waverly read the line twice. Then she printed it and put it on the studio wall next to the original breathing room sketch. Returned to her by the archive. Framed now, the pencil lines still sure and unhurried, in the way she had always worked, long before anyone else had decided her work was worth taking. It had always been enough. She had simply stopped letting other people convince her it wasn't.